And this week, the Democrats rolled out their long-awaited platform. It was called A Better Deal. Let me see if I remember this correctly. The final version was Better Jobs, Better Wages, Better Future was the subtitle, and there was some policy specifics to go along with that, and more promise to come. Now, here to talk to us about the Democrats' Better Deal agenda is Bryce Covert. Bryce is a contributing op-ed writer at the New York Times. She contributes to The New Republic, The Nation, and other publications. She is also winner of at least one prize, which is not in front of me right now, embarrassingly enough. Oh yes, an Exceptional Merit in Media Award from the National Women's Political Caucus. She joins us now. Bryce, thanks for coming on the program.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely, and sorry I almost misplaced your prize there. So you wrote a great piece, I thought, for the New Republic. The central contradiction of the Democrats' Better Deal was a headline given to it. So why don't we start with that? What was your take on the Better Deal agenda?
Well, first, credit where credit is due. What's interesting, I think, about the Better Deal agenda is that it is targeting something that really does plague the American economy right now, which is monopoly power or increased money and political and power concentration among a small handful of very large corporations. This is not necessarily something that all Democrats have been comfortable talking about. Monopoly power as a concept is something that has really sort of left the political discourse over the past couple of decades. So it's great to see Democrats reviving that talking point and to promise to crack down on monopolies and heavily concentrated industries to protect consumers from, unfair prices, unfair practices, and things like that. So that was the exciting part. I think it's new. I think it's interesting. And I think it also can resonate with a lot of Americans who probably feel that their boss has become less and less interested in listening to their needs, has more and more influence over their lives, as well as these big corporations that you just kind of can't escape. When you go to get high-speed internet, you have very few choices, if any at all. Things like that, I think, are really real for a lot of Americans. But then there's some other pieces of it that I think then end up contradicting a lot of that original message.
Yeah, I mean, my take on it, Bryce Covert, was very much like yours. I mean, as you point out in your piece, the original slogan that was leaked was "Better Skills, Better Job, Better Jobs, Better Wages." And I guess first of all, I agree with you. I think as policy, number one, the breaking up monopolies, reinforcing the idea of antitrust, and how that affects people's lives, I think can turn into an extremely compelling message, because people do understand and do feel that they're being shafted by corporations, and they're right that corporations have gotten enormous monopoly or quasi-monopoly power in all sorts of corners of our lives. So I think that could be great. But even though they took out the phrase better skills, some of the thinking that went into that is, I think that's part of your concern too, that in effect, it feels as if what the Democrats are saying is you are prepared for the new economy, so it's kind of your fault you're in bad shape. Is that a fair summary of the concern as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, it is good that they have, erased better skills from the slogan, and part of me wonders if that happened sort of overnight because they saw a lot of pushback on that. But they haven't really gotten rid of that concept. The op-eds that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer wrote promoting this agenda both talk a lot about needing to give people skills and the tools for the new economy. The document itself talks a lot about that. And the message that sends to workers, I think, in the American economy is you're not good enough yet to make it in this economy. Of course, what they're saying is we're going to help you get there. But I think a lot of workers feel like, that's not really what's going on. I definitely need to, make sure that I'm maintaining my skills. But the reason I'm not getting paid more, or the reason I can't find full-time work, or the reason I can't find work at all is not because of me. It's because this economy is stacked against me. And that message that the economy is stacked against, the interests of the American workforce is part of what they were talking about with the monopoly power and the concentration of power. And yet then they turn around and say, but workers, you need to do something to make yourselves better because you're not good enough to get hired in this new economy. And I don't think that will resonate very well with people. I just don't think people believe that that's what's happening in their lives. And there's also just very little evidence that that's the real problem here. It gets at this idea of a skills mismatch, where, corporations are looking to fill jobs that are highly skilled, and no one in the American economy, in the workforce, has the exact skills that they need. If that were true, then wages would be rising, at least for some part of the workforce that does have those skills. Employers would be investing in training. Unemployment would really only be concentrated in certain industries that don't have those skills. So we don't see those signs right now. What's really happening is the sluggish economy that has come back from the recession but not fully recovered is shared by all. Wages aren't rising. There's a real widespread malaise.
Yeah, and just to add to those great points, Bryce, Covert, I would also add that job creation since the financial crisis has not been in highly skilled industries or positions. It has tended to be a service industry and lower wage jobs that have been created since the crisis of 2008. And I think you would probably agree, but let me know if you don't, that this kind of language is straight out of the Bill Clinton era centrist, and I would say Wall Street-funded Democratic rhetoric of the 1990s, that it was all about training people for the new economy. I would even go further and say, but you don't have to agree with me because I'm a troublemaker, but I would go so far as to say that really wages are stagnant because of inequality, not because workers lack skills, but because we have a crisis of economic inequality in this country that is probably one of the glaring omissions in this document, even though it's there, it can be inferred that some of these policies would help with inequality, that's really why workers aren't getting ahead.
I think that's right, but I also think a lot of it has to do with an inequality of power. Which, again, if you talk about monopolies and industry concentration, you're starting to get at the problem there, which is that, workers have just seen their power so eroded vis-a-vis their bosses, vis-a-vis corporations. They have so little ability these days to push back and demand higher wages, demand full-time work and better schedules, better jobs. So, addressing monopoly power, I do think would go a long way towards that. There are other things you need to address, too, the erosion of unions. I think that Democrats should get behind a job guarantee, which would be a huge boost to workers' bargaining power. So I think Democrats are sort of inching towards it. But I agree that this whole skills piece of the equation is very Clintonian, is very centrist. And these days, you can see this coming straight from conservatives, too. They keep wanting to say, workers aren't getting ahead and we need to give them more education. We need to give them more opportunity. Instead of saying, the playing field is not fair and the deck is stacked against workers and we need to make this a more equitable situation so that they do have more bargaining power against bosses. My sense is that the reason this is included is that Democrats really wanted to be able to get everyone in their party on board with this new agenda. They went to every member, apparently, at least in the Senate, and asked for their input. And to some extent, I think it's great to be able to have some party unity. But if it means that you're introducing these things that are, frankly, just going to rub a lot of American workers the wrong way, and doesn't even really address the actual facts on the ground of what's the problem with the American economy, what's the point of such an exercise?
Right. I think that's exactly right. And I think that if you dilute your message, and, I'm also very supportive of the anti-monopoly thrust, but if you dilute your message, you're not going to get the results you want. I mean, and if we're talking about rubbing workers the wrong way. Here's a phrase that rubbed this worker the wrong way, and you quote it. It says, it is far too common for that Americans who are eager to work hard and earn a good living are left behind because they don't have the skills needed to compete in a changing economy. That word compete to me really smacks of the ideology that says that workers are no longer people. They're no longer a force. They're no longer, whether it's a unionized force, an organized force, it's individuals competing in a kind of free market, sharing economy, Uber-ish world. And maybe I'm reading too much into that word compete, but I think that it undermines the collaborative nature of the old democratic ideology that said we're all in this together. We're not competing against one another. We're all trying to help each other, lift each other up as an economy and as a society. But am I reading too much into that word?
No, I think you're absolutely right in reading that sentence that way. And I wish that sentence had read, it's far too common that Americans who are eager to work hard and earn a good living are not able to do so because they don't have the power to demand what they want from their bosses, or something like that. I think people don't feel that they're, not skilled enough for the combat of our economy. It's that they will never be able to win that battle, right? The deck is stacked against them, which Democrats, say as much as that in other parts of the document. So this idea that you need to hone your skills so you can go out there and beat everybody else, first of all, I just think rings hollow. And then, like you say, it paints this picture of workers who have to fight against each other, which is a zero-sum game. What it's saying to them is you have to work better so you get ahead of all the other people that you're competing against, rather than let's all band together and improve conditions for everybody.
Right, exactly. And again, we're talking with writer Bryce Covert about the Democrats' better deal agenda. I guess a couple other things I wanted to hit. One is, even though I did very much like the anti-monopoly message and was candidly very pleasantly surprised, A, that it was there, and B, with the language that was used to explain it. I mean, really pleasantly surprised by it. But there was a glaring omission, in my view, Bryce Covert, and that was Wall Street and the big banks that continue to threaten the economy, that continue to hold. When you talk about leveling the playing field so that people can fight back, as long as you have 5 banks essentially running the economy and largely dictating and staffing what the Treasury Department and other regulators do, whether it's Goldman Sachs under Trump or Citigroup under the Democrats, then to me, you haven't really even addressed the issue of monopoly power, because you've left out 50% or more of all corporate profits.
Yeah, it definitely was not in there. And again, my suspicion is the reason that Wall Street was not mentioned is because this is this exercise in getting everyone on board. And there are definitely Democrats in the Senate and in the party who are less comfortable being the enemies of Wall Street and going after the big banks and the power they wield over our economy. They have promised that there are more planks of this platform that are going to be forthcoming. And I believe that Schumer has said that finance will be one of them. There was an interesting video of their press release event that I watched, in which someone in the audience asked about bringing back Glass-Steagall. Yeah. And Elizabeth Warren sort of did a little dance in the background. So my guess is that Elizabeth Warren is working really hard to get that kind of stuff in there. This is a division within the party, and I'm not entirely sure how or whether they'll be able to work it out. The good news, though, is, like you said, the language that's in there that they use to describe monopolies, I mean, that could come straight out of Elizabeth Warren's mouth. And so I do think that shows that she's had an influence over how the party is talking about, thinking about the economy. And if she has her way, I think we will see perhaps some more strong language on Wall Street. But it's who knows how that will end up being resolved.
Well, I saw that little dance too, and I enjoyed it. And by the way, I also commend Schumer and Pelosi, especially I think Schumer's editorial, for really being pretty blunt about the fact that the Democrats should have been doing much better on this all along. Good for them. Last question, I guess, about that phrase "better deal." A couple weeks ago, everybody, rightfully made fun of some Democratic consultants who jokingly put out as a possible slogan for the party, "You should see the other guys." Well, you could argue that better deal kind of says the same thing, that it's, well, it may not be a great deal, but it's not as bad as the other guys are giving you. And it strikes me that something more concrete would have been better, like great deal, good deal, new deal, as Roosevelt said, square deal, as Teddy Roosevelt said. But this is just like, well, not as bad a deal. Am I being too tough on them, you think?
Far be it for me to know what goes into these slogans. What I am excited about is that they have been clear that this is supposed to draw a direct line back to FDR's New Deal and Teddy Roosevelt's Square Deal, which is a good sign. It's a good sign that they're owning that and hearkening back toward that. Perhaps, they do that a lot and don't live up to it, but it's a legacy that we should be proud of and be claiming. Whether the word better really does a lot of work for them, it's true. I mean, you don't just want to stand in opposition. Then again, if you're able to both say, look at those other guys, they're crazy, but also here's what we have to offer you. I mean, I think that's really the tightrope they're going to have to walk if they're going to do well in the midterms and in 2020, because you can't ignore the fact that the other side is just, wreaking havoc on our systems and our economy.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to ignore nowadays, isn't it? So we'll have to leave it there, but Bryce Covert, writer and writer of a recent piece in the New Republic on a better deal. Thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.